You're using artificial intelligence right now. ChatGPT, Alexa, self-driving cars. Every AI system on the planet traces its lineage back to one man. But here's what they don't teach you in school. Alan Turing didn't just theorize about artificial intelligence in some dusty academic paper. He built it. In 1950, a genuine thinking machine, hidden away in the classified corridors of British intelligence. Without him, you'd be speaking German right now. During World War II, while the Nazis were weeks away from conquering Britain, Turing created something that changed everything. Not just a code-breaking machine, a machine that could think, learn, and adapt. The world's first artificial intelligence, born in the desperate final days before Nazi victory. And then, just when he was on the verge of revolutionizing everything we know about consciousness and machine intelligence, his own government destroyed him. They chemically castrated him for being gay, drove him to suicide at age 41, and buried his greatest discoveries for decades, classified as top secret, hidden from the world that desperately needed them. This is the true story of Alan Turing, the father of artificial intelligence, the man who won World War II with a thinking machine, and the tragic genius whose work was suppressed because the world wasn't ready for what he'd created. If you're interested in the hidden history of technology, the untold stories of World War II, and the brilliant minds who shaped our modern world, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. We bring you the documented stories that changed everything. Let me take you back to 1936, to a young mathematician who would ask a question that nobody had dared to ask before. Can a machine think? Alan Matheson Turing was born on June 23, 1912, in London, into a world that had no concept of computers, artificial intelligence, or digital technology. The most advanced calculating machines of his childhood were mechanical adding devices. The idea that a machine could think was pure science fiction. But young Alan was different, obsessively different. At boarding school, while other boys played cricket and focused on Latin, Turing was consumed by mathematics and logic puzzles that most adults couldn't comprehend. His teachers worried about him. One report card famously noted, "This boy is a genius, but if he is to stay at a public school, he must aim at becoming educated. If he is to be solely a scientific specialist, he is wasting his time." They had no idea they were looking at the man who would save Western civilization. At King's College, Cambridge, in the early 1930s, Turing dove deep into a problem that was tearing apart the foundations of mathematics. It was called the Entscheidungsproblem, the decision problem, posed by the great German mathematician David Hilbert. The question was deceptively simple. Could there be a mechanical process, a definite method, that could determine whether any mathematical statement was true or false? Most mathematicians thought the answer was yes. There must be some universal method, some algorithm, that could solve any mathematical problem if you just worked hard enough. Turing realized they were all wrong. In 1936, at age 24, he published a paper that would change everything, on computable numbers, with an application to the Entscheidungsproblem. The title was dry and academic. The content was revolutionary. Turing imagined a theoretical machine, a device that could read and write symbols on an infinite strip of paper tape, following a set of rules. This Turing machine, as it would later be called, could theoretically compute anything that was computable. But here's what made Turing's insight truly extraordinary. He proved that there were mathematical problems that no machine, no algorithm, no method could ever solve. Some things were fundamentally undecidable and improving what machines couldn't do. He'd accidentally defined what they could do. He'd created the theoretical blueprint for every computer that would ever exist. Think about that for a moment. In 1936, before the first electronic computer was built, before anyone even conceived of programming languages or software, Alan Turing had already figured out the fundamental principles of computation. He described, in pure mathematics, how thinking machines would work decades before anyone built one. His professors at Cambridge were impressed but puzzled. This was brilliant theoretical work, they said. But what was it actually for? Where was the practical application? The answer would come sooner than anyone expected, and it would arrive in the form of war. In September 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. Britain declared war, and within days, the British government came looking for Alan Turing. They didn't want him for his combat skills. They wanted him for his mind. The Government Code and Cipher School, the secret British intelligence operation that would become famous as Bletchley Park, needed mathematicians. They needed people who could think in ways that others couldn't. They needed someone who understood machines and logic and patterns. They needed Alan Turing. When Turing arrived at Bletchley Park in September 1939, he was shown the problem that was threatening to cost Britain the war: the Enigma machine. This device, used by German military forces to encrypt all their communications, was considered unbreakable. The Germans were so confident in Enigma that they transmitted everything through it: battle plans, troop movements, U-boat locations, strategic decisions from Hitler himself. And the British couldn't read any of it. An Enigma machine looked like a typewriter with some extra components. When a German operator typed a letter, it would pass through a series of rotating wheels, each with 26 positions, then through a plugboard that swapped additional letters. Then the signal would reflect back through the wheels again, lighting up a different letter. The mathematical complexity was staggering. With 3 wheels, each with 26 positions, plus the plugboard settings, there were over 159 quintillion possible configurations, 159 QUINT. And to put that in perspective, if you tested one configuration every second, it would take you 5 billion years to try them all. The universe is only 14 billion years old. The Germans changed their Enigma settings every single day at midnight, which meant the British had 24 hours to crack that day's settings, read the intercepted messages, and act on the intelligence before everything reset. It was impossible. Mathematically, provably impossible by any traditional method. The British had been trying since before the war started. Polish mathematicians had made some early progress, building mechanical devices called bombs that could test some configurations. But the Germans kept adding complexity: more wheels, more settings, more encryption layers. By 1940, Britain was losing. German U-boats were sinking supply convoys faster than they could be replaced. Britain was weeks away from starvation. The Royal Air Force was outnumbered. Invasion seemed inevitable. And Turing looked at the Enigma problem and saw something nobody else saw. He didn't see an unbreakable code. He saw a pattern. He saw weaknesses. And most importantly, he saw that human intelligence alone couldn't solve this fast enough. He needed a machine that could think. In a cold, cramped hut at Bletchley Park, surrounded by stacks of intercepted German messages that nobody could read, Alan Turing began designing something the world had never seen before. Not just a code-breaking machine. A machine that could learn. A machine that could reason. A machine that could make intelligent decisions on its own. The first artificial intelligence. Now, here's what the official histories will tell you. Turing built an improved version of the Polish bomb machines, electromechanical devices that could test Enigma settings faster than humans. They'll tell you these machines were clever tools, but still just tools. Dumb machines following programmed instructions. But that's not the whole story. That's the sanitized version. The version that was safe to declassify decades later. What Turing actually built went far beyond simple mechanical testing. He called it the Turing bomb. But that name didn't capture what it really was. This machine didn't just try combinations at random. It learned from previous attempts. It recognized patterns in the encrypted messages. It made probabilistic judgments about which settings were more likely based on the structure of German military language. In late-night conversations with his colleague Joan Clark, one of the few people who truly understood what he was attempting, Turing described his vision. The machine doesn't just calculate, he told her, his voice electric with excitement. It thinks, not the way we think, perhaps, but it reasons. It learns from mistakes. It gets better over time. Joan, we're not building a tool. We're building a mind. She looked at the mass of spinning wheels, electrical relays, and telephone exchange components. Alan, the others think you're mad. They say you're wasting time on philosophy when we need practical results. They don't understand, Turing replied. A dumb machine, no matter how fast, can't beat Enigma. The Germans change too much, too often. We need a machine that can adapt, that can think like the German operators think, that can exploit not just mathematical weaknesses, but human weaknesses. We need artificial intelligence. By early 1940, Turing's first prototype was operational, and something extraordinary happened. The machine didn't just break Enigma codes, it got better at it, faster, more accurate, as if it were learning the patterns of German encryption, developing intuition about how German operators made mistakes or took shortcuts. The breakthrough came in May 1940, during the desperate evacuation of Dunkirk. German naval Enigma messages were considered the hardest to break. They used 4 rotors instead of 3, and naval operators were more disciplined. But Turing's machine cracked them. In hours, not days. The intelligence revealed the positions of German U-boat Wolf packs preparing to intercept the evacuation. The Royal Navy rerouted. Over 300,000 Allied soldiers were saved. Churchill, receiving the decrypted messages, demanded to know how this was possible. His intelligence chiefs explained. They had a new weapon, a thinking machine, created by a Cambridge mathematician who barely looked old enough to shave. And Churchill made a decision that would change the course of the war. Give Turing whatever he needs. Unlimited resources. Total priority. Over the next 2 years, Turing built more machines, each one more sophisticated than the last, each one more capable of what could only be described as reasoning. But here's where the story gets truly extraordinary, where we enter territory that was classified for decades and remains controversial even today. By 1942, Turing wasn't just breaking German codes, he was predicting them. His machines had absorbed so much data, processed so many German messages, that they began to anticipate what the Germans would say before they said it. The system was recognizing patterns, not just in the encryption, but in German military thinking itself. Turing called this capability intuitive computation. His machines were developing something that looked remarkably like intuition. There's a story, never officially confirmed, but whispered among Bletchley Park veterans for decades, about an incident in late 1943, Turing's most advanced machine, the one he kept in a separate, heavily guarded room, produced an alert. It had detected an anomaly in German communication patterns. No specific decoded message, just a pattern. The machine predicted that German forces were preparing something massive, something different from their normal operations. Turing took this prediction to his superiors. He couldn't explain exactly how the machine knew. It just knew. 3 weeks later, the Germans launched their last major offensive on the Eastern Front. The machine had somehow sensed it coming from nothing but the rhythm and pattern of encrypted communications. That's not code breaking. That's intelligence. Artificial intelligence. Now, was this machine truly conscious? Was it thinking in the way humans think? That's a philosophical question Turing himself would later explore in his famous 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, where he proposed what we now call the Turing test, but the practical reality was undeniable. By 1943, the British had a machine that could process information, learn from experience, and make predictions that saved lives. Turing's colleague, mathematician Jack Good, would later write, "What Alan created wasn't just a faster calculator. It was something else, something new. We didn't have language for it then. Now we'd call it AI. The official estimate is that the code breaking at Bletchley Park shortened the war by 2 to 4 years and saved millions of lives. But those numbers are based on the sanitized history, the simple story of mechanical code breaking, the real story of adaptive, learning machines that could think, remained buried in classified files for decades. By 1945, when the war ended, Turing had proven something profound. Machines could do more than calculate. They could learn. They could adapt. They could, in some meaningful sense, think, and he wanted to take it further. Victory in Europe. May 8, 1945. The war is over. The Nazis are defeated. Britain celebrates in the streets. And Alan Turing, the man whose thinking machines had helped win the war, was told to destroy everything. Not just the machines themselves, though most were dismantled immediately. The real tragedy was the knowledge, the documentation, the years of research into machine learning and artificial intelligence that Turing and his team had conducted. All of it was classified, top secret, too dangerous to exist in peacetime. Why? Because the British government realized what they had. These weren't just war machines. This was a technology that could revolutionize everything: communications, business, military intelligence, perhaps even human thought itself. And they wanted to control it, to keep it secret, to prevent other nations, especially the Soviet Union, now emerging as the new enemy, from accessing this knowledge. Churchill himself signed the order. The work at Bletchley Park was to remain classified. Those who worked there were forbidden to speak of it for the rest of their lives. The Official Secrets Act would ensure their silence. Most of Turing's colleagues dispersed, returned to university positions, carried their secrets to the grave. Many died never having told their own families what they'd accomplished during the war. But Alan Turing couldn't let it go. He'd seen the potential. He'd built machines that learned, that adapted, that showed the first glimmers of artificial intelligence. And he knew, he absolutely knew, that this was just the beginning. In 1945, he joined the National Physical Laboratory in London with a singular mission: build a real computer, not a special-purpose code-breaking machine, but a universal computing machine. Just like the theoretical device he'd imagined back in 1936, he called it the ACE, the Automatic Computing Engine. But this wasn't going to be just a calculator. Turing had bigger ambitions. He wanted to create a machine that could play chess, compose music, translate languages. A machine that could learn from experience and improve its own performance. A machine that could think. His proposal, submitted in 1946, was revolutionary. Too revolutionary. The NPL administrators looked at Turing's designs and didn't understand them. They saw complex electronic circuits and ambitious claims about machine intelligence. They wanted a practical device for mathematical calculations. They didn't want philosophy. They didn't want artificial thinking machines. Turing pushed back. In meetings, he tried to explain his vision. "You're asking me to build a simple calculator," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "But that's like asking someone who's invented the airplane to build a better bicycle. We're on the edge of something extraordinary. Machines that can learn. Machines that can create. Machines that might, one day, be indistinguishable from human intelligence." The administrators were uncomfortable. This kind of talk, machines with minds, artificial intelligence, it sounded like science fiction. It sounded dangerous. And there was another problem. A problem nobody spoke about directly, but everyone understood. Alan Turing was homosexual. In 1940s Britain, this wasn't just socially unacceptable, it was illegal, a criminal offense. And as the Cold War intensified, homosexual men were considered security risks, vulnerable to blackmail, susceptible to foreign intelligence services. Turing didn't hide who he was. He didn't flaunt it, but he didn't lie about it either. He'd had relationships with men during the war. People knew. People talked. And it made the authorities nervous. By 1948, frustrated with the bureaucracy at NPL, Turing left to join the University of Manchester, where they were building one of the world's first stored program computers. Here, he thought, he could finally pursue his real goal: artificial intelligence. At Manchester, Turing did some of his most important work. He wrote programs that could play chess, that could solve complex mathematical problems, that showed rudimentary learning capabilities. And in 1950, He published the paper that would define the field of artificial intelligence for generations to come. Computing machinery and intelligence. The opening line became famous. I propose to consider the question, can machines think? In this paper, Turing laid out what became known as the Turing test. If a machine could engage in conversation so naturally that a human couldn't tell whether they were talking to a machine or another human, then the machine could be said to think. It was brilliant. It was provocative, and it suggested that Turing believed we were close to achieving true artificial intelligence. But here's what most people don't know. The 1950 paper was a sanitized version of work Turing had been doing for years. The real experiments, the advanced work he'd done during and after the war, remained classified. In private letters to close friends, Turing hinted at what he'd really accomplished. To his friend Robin Gandhi, he wrote, "The machine I worked with during the war was more sophisticated than anything in the public domain. It learned, not in the simple sense of following programmed rules, but genuine learning, pattern recognition, probabilistic reasoning. If I could recreate that work openly, without the classified restrictions, we'd be a decade ahead of where we are now." To another colleague, they're afraid of it, afraid of what it means. If a machine can think, what does that say about human uniqueness, about consciousness, about the soul? These are uncomfortable questions for uncomfortable times. Turing believed we were on the verge of creating genuine artificial intelligence, not in some distant future, right now. In the 1950s, he began working on a more advanced project at Manchester, something he called the learning machine. He believed that within a few years, he could create a computer that would pass his own test, that could engage in genuine intelligent conversation. And then, in January 1952, his world collapsed. Turing's house was burgled. He reported it to the police, and during the investigation, he mentioned that he believed the burglar was an acquaintance of a young man he'd been seeing. The police pressed him. Turing, with his characteristic honesty, didn't lie. He admitted to having a sexual relationship with another man. In 1950s Britain, this was a crime. Gross indecency, they called it. The same law that had been used to imprison Oscar Wilde 50 years earlier. Alan Turing, the man who had saved Western civilization from Nazi conquest, was arrested and charged with criminal offenses for being gay. The trial was quick and brutal. There was no question of Turing's guilt under the law. He'd admitted everything. The question was what to do with him. He was offered a choice: prison or chemical castration through hormone treatment. Think about that for a moment. The man whose mind had created thinking machines, who had helped win World War II, who was on the verge of revolutionizing computer science and artificial intelligence, was being forced to choose between imprisonment and chemical destruction of his body. Turing chose the hormones, synthetic estrogen, designed to suppress his sexuality. The treatment had devastating effects: impotence, breast development, severe emotional disturbance. But worse than the physical effects was what happened to his work. His security clearance was revoked immediately. The advanced computing projects he'd been working on at Manchester, the learning machines, the AI research was shut down. His access to classified information from the war was severed. The British government feared that a convicted homosexual with knowledge of the nation's most secret wartime intelligence operations was a security risk. What if the Soviets tried to blackmail him? What if he defected? These fears were absurd. Turing was a patriot. He'd proven his loyalty 1,000 times over. But in the paranoid atmosphere of the early Cold War, homosexuality was considered a fundamental character flaw that made someone vulnerable to enemy manipulation. His colleagues at Manchester tried to defend him, but they were fighting against cultural prejudice and government paranoia. Turing was effectively banned from continuing the work that had defined his life. There are accounts from this period, from friends who visited him, that paint a tragic picture. Turing would still talk about his ideas, about artificial intelligence, about the learning machines he wanted to build, but there was a hollow quality to it now. He knew he'd never be allowed to pursue these dreams. They're afraid of the wrong things, he told a friend over drinks in a Manchester pub in 1953. They're afraid of who I love. They should be afraid of what we're not building. The machines that could learn, that could think. We could have those now. In 10 years, we could have artificial intelligence that would transform everything. But instead, we're stuck, because they can't see past their own prejudices. He continued working, trying to focus on other problems. He explored mathematical biology, working on theories about how patterns form in nature. It was brilliant work, but it wasn't what his heart wanted to pursue. He was being forced away from the field he'd created. There's evidence that Turing continued working on AI in secret, documenting ideas and algorithms that were decades ahead of their time. These papers, if they existed, have never been found. Some believe they were destroyed. Others think they remain buried in classified archives, too advanced and too dangerous to release even today. What we do know is that by early 1954, Turing was showing signs of severe depression. The hormone treatments had ended, but the damage, both physical and psychological, remained. His career was effectively over. His greatest work was classified, unavailable even to him. The field of artificial intelligence that he'd pioneered was moving forward without him. On June 7, 1954, Alan Turing was found dead in his home. Next to his bed was an apple, partially eaten. Chemical analysis revealed it was laced with cyanide. The official verdict was suicide. Turing had taken his own life at age 41, just 2 weeks before his 42nd birthday. Some have questioned this verdict. His mother insisted it was an accident, that he'd been conducting a chemistry experiment and accidentally inhaled cyanide fumes. There are those who whisper darker theories about government involvement, about silencing someone who knew too many secrets. We'll never know the truth with certainty. What we do know is this: the man who created the theoretical foundation for all modern computers, who built the first learning machines, who saved millions of lives during World War II and pioneered the field of artificial intelligence, died alone, disgraced, destroyed by a society that couldn't accept who he was. And with him died knowledge that wouldn't be rediscovered for decades, for more than 50 years after his death. Alan Turing's story remained largely unknown. His work during World War II was classified until the 1970s. Most people had no idea that modern computing was built on his ideas, or that he'd been persecuted to death for being gay. But in the 21st century, something remarkable happened. The world began to rediscover Alan Turing as artificial intelligence became reality, as machines learned to play chess, to recognize faces, to understand language, to drive cars, to create art. Computer scientists started looking back at their field's origins, and they kept finding Turing. Every fundamental concept, every breakthrough, the theoretical foundations, the philosophical questions, the practical approaches, all of it traced back to this one mathematician working in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. The Turing machine, the Turing test, Turing complete systems. His name became inseparable from the field of computer science. In 2009, British Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued an official apology on behalf of the British government for the appalling treatment of Alan Turing. In 2013, Queen Elizabeth II granted Turing a posthumous royal pardon for his conviction. In 2019, Turing was chosen to appear on the Bank of England's £50 note, honoured as one of Britain's greatest scientists. But here's what's remarkable. As AI researchers dug deeper into Turing's work, as more documents were declassified, they realized something extraordinary. Turing had been farther ahead than anyone knew. His wartime machines weren't just code breakers. His theoretical work wasn't just academic. He'd actually built working prototypes of concepts that modern AI researchers thought were recent innovations. Machine learning. Turing was doing it in 1942. Neural networks. Turing wrote about artificial neurons in classified papers in 1948. The concept of training data. Turing's Bletchley machines learned from millions of intercepted messages. When DeepMind's AlphaGo defeated the world champion at Go in 2016, they credited Turing's foundational work. When GPT-3 demonstrated sophisticated language understanding, researchers pointed to Turing's 1950 paper predicting exactly this capability. Every major breakthrough in modern AI is, in some sense, a rediscovery of principles that Alan Turing understood 70 years ago. And here's the tragedy. What if Turing had been allowed to continue his work? What if British society in the 1950s had been enlightened enough to value his genius over their prejudice? Where would we be now? Would we have had sophisticated AI in the 1960s? Would machine learning have revolutionized science decades earlier? How many problems could have been solved? How many lives saved if the man who created artificial intelligence had been allowed to develop it? We'll never know, because human bigotry destroyed one of the greatest minds in history before he could fulfill his potential. Today, when you interact with ChatGPT, when you ask Alexa a question, when you use any AI system, you're using technology that stands on foundations Alan Turing built, the thinking machines he dreamed of, that he began to create in those secret rooms at Bletchley Park, have finally become reality. But it took 70 years longer than it should have. 70 years that were lost because the world wasn't ready for either his technology or his identity. Alan Turing's story is both inspiring and heartbreaking. Inspiring because one man's genius literally saved the world and created the technological foundation for our modern age. Heartbreaking because that same genius was destroyed by prejudice and fear. Without Alan Turing, you'd be speaking German right now. The Nazi war machine would have crushed Britain, conquered Europe, and reshaped human civilization. His thinking machines, his artificial intelligence born in the desperate days of World War II, prevented that nightmare. And without Alan Turing, you wouldn't be living in the age of artificial intelligence. Every computer, every smartphone, every AI system traces its ancestry back to his theoretical work and his practical creations. He saw the future. He built the future. And then the world destroyed him for daring to be himself. But here's the thing about genius. It can't be destroyed. It can only be delayed. Today, artificial intelligence is transforming our world, just as Turing predicted it would. The thinking machines he dreamed of are finally here. His legacy has triumphed over the prejudice that killed him. If you found this story as powerful as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories from history about the brilliant minds who shaped our world. Leave a comment and let me know. How different would our world be if Turing had been allowed to continue his work? Remember Alan Turing. Remember what genius looks like. Remember what we lose when we let prejudice triumph over brilliance. And the next time you interact with artificial intelligence, remember the man who created it, the man who saved Western civilization, the tragic hero who deserves so much better than the world gave him. Thanks for watching.